Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Weekly News. I'm Derek Lavasser.
And I'm Stephanie Harlow.
And we're going to get right into the case this week, what we're going to be talking about. You can tell by the title, we're talking about BTK. But before we do, really quick, because I didn't put an end date on it, and I felt like maybe that wasn't right. Thank you, everybody who's used the back-to-school code. Actually, we sold way more than I expected, but that's a good thing. That's a good problem to have, so I appreciate it. But we are going to put an end date on that back-to-school discount for September 4th. That'll be the Monday after this episode, the regular Crime Weekly episode comes out, which is on that Sunday. So if you're seeing this on Crime Weekly News, you still got a few days, and we'll put something in the Crime Weekly episode as well to let you know. But September 4th at midnight, that's going to be the deadline. The discount will no longer work. So if you want it and you want that discount, now's the time to do it.
Now's the time.
Now's the time. You want to dive right into it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is an interesting, you don't always discuss what news we're going to cover beforehand, but it's interesting that you decided to cover this, and I'll get into that in a second. So real quick to catch you up to speed, according to an August 23rd statement, the Osage County Sheriff's Office has said there's potential connections between Dennis Rader and some of the unsolved murders in Kansas and Missouri. So it's funny that we're covering it this week because something was just launched on Discovery Channel. We recently had an interview with Kerry Rawson for a special that I did about the Gilgo Beach murders. And Kerry, for those of you who don't know, she's the daughter of Dennis Rader, and she's a sweetheart. She's been through a lot, and she's found a way, even though she's been through so much, to take a positive out of it and educate people on what she's gone through, and also shed some insight from her perspective on what it's like to grow up with someone like Dennis Rader, which is, I can't imagine the things that girl has seen. I put a lot of respect on her name, knowing that she's come to where she is now and is able to speak as much as she does publicly about it, knowing what her father did. And I will say, when I first saw this script, Stephanie, this is not a surprise to me. I mentioned it on the Gilgo special that we know very little about Rex Heuermann, and we're mentioning a few names as the Gilgo Four. Then there's another group of individuals, there's like another 7 or 8 that may be connected. But this is over a duration of like 20 years.
Right.
So the idea that there may not have been more victims in between that we don't even know their names yet or their connections is not a far reach.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to this case, and some of you may know about it, some of you may not. But Stephanie's going to fill you in on the details.
Yeah, I feel like anytime you unveil or unmask a serial killer, that is the new challenge, right? Like, you have the victim or the series of victims that allowed you to identify that person, and then you have the work in front of you of trying to figure out who are the other victims, because it's a high probability, right? It's more likely than not that this person has other victims you don't know about. So that's what they're dealing with Rex Heuermann, who's still innocent until found guilty.
That's fair.
Allegedly. And obviously Dennis Rader, or BTK, as he gave himself that name. I honestly hate to call him BTK because it is a name he gave himself, but that is how he is best known. So Dennis Rader, he called himself BTK. That's an acronym for Bind, Torture, Kill, which is what he did to his victims. He was sentenced in 2005 after pleading guilty to killing 10 people between the years 1974 and 1991. Now, law enforcement has recently conducted a search of Rader's former home in Park City, Kansas, and they claim they've recovered items of interest, which they will now put through thorough forensic examination to see if they have potential relevance to the ongoing investigation. And the investigation that they are specifically looking at is that of Cynthia Dawn Kinney from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, who went missing in 1976. The Osage County Sheriff Eddie Verdon has told KSNW-TV that Rader had previously informed police that he had some trophies, souvenirs, and driver's licenses of some of his victims hidden in a location that had not been found. And law enforcement, while they were doing the search on his former residence, they reportedly searched in 2 locations. And in the first spot, they uncovered evidence that they haven't said what it is yet, but they said they uncovered evidence that was buried about 14 to 16 inches underground, including what they've been referring to as a time capsule. And they also found a pantyhose ligature that they said would be consistent with the times of his crimes. So on Thursday, August 24th, the Osage County Sheriff's Office shared a photo from one of Rader's journal entries from 1976, and he titled this journal entry PJ Bad Wash Day. And according to law enforcement, PJ stands for Project. Rader mentioned a brunette being the target of this project, and he said he would watch the nearby laundromat for a possible victim because the laundromat was, quote, a good place to watch victims and dream. And 16-year-old Cynthia Dawn Kinney was actually last seen at a laundromat when she disappeared. She's a brunette, and so obviously they're trying to see if she was the victim that he was referring to. Law enforcement's also looking into whether Rader could be linked to the 1990 strangulation death of 22-year-old Shauna Beth Garber. She was found hogtied near an abandoned farmhouse in rural Missouri in December of 1990, and an autopsy showed she'd been strangled, raped, and restrained with 6 different types of bindings, including nylon and lead ropes, coaxial and telephone cables, as well as paracord and clothesline. And this specific paracord was only sold or distributed to people in the military, which we know BTK was. And at the time of the discovery of her body, it was believed she'd been dead for about 2 months. So obviously, this is... I mean, he was operating back in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and they're still turning up evidence that are going to link to unsolved and cold cases. And I always think about this too when we cover cases on Crime Weekly that are unsolved. Was this person that we're talking about who went missing, who showed up, dead with specific trademarks or hallmarks of a specific serial killer? Were they a victim of this serial killer? Or, people who've never been found? Like, I always think about the Springfield 3. Remember when we covered that case? Like, that was such a disturbing case for me. These 3 women just vanish into thin air. We have no idea where they are. They could have been the victim of one of these serial killers who has since been uncovered, who's since been, sent to prison, but who is not going to relinquish that last little shred of power by giving these families closure. So it's really good that even though this person's behind bars and he can't hurt anyone anymore, law enforcement's still dedicating resources and time to find the truth and to hopefully bring some closure to these family members, or at least answers to these family members of these people who mysteriously went missing or died, and there are no answers. And I really do appreciate that, because they don't have to do it. They could just say, well, he's gone and he's in prison and he can't hurt anyone, so what's the point? But they're doing it because it needs to be done, and these victims need to have some sort of justice. And I guess, like I said, their family members need some answers, because there's families, thousands and thousands and thousands of families out there wondering where their daughters are, where their sons are, and hopefully this will help. And the same with Rex Heuermann, right? I imagine that this man has a great deal more victims than we would even guess.
I completely agree with you. And I agree with everything you said before that, where the investigators could spend time working on cases that have offenders that are still out there, right? As a preventative measure to try to identify them for the murders they've already committed, but to prevent them from committing future murders. Mm-hmm. But they are working these cases solely because they want to give the family members of those victims some type of resolution. And as you mentioned, Dennis Rader is going to be behind bars. He's not going anywhere. So does it change anything there? For him, no, it doesn't. But it would mean something to the family to understand what happened to their loved one, who's responsible for it, and to know that the person who committed this act against their loved one is being held accountable and will never see the light of day again. I think that can help in the healing process. The unknown, I would imagine, is the hardest part for many of these families. Yeah. But it was interesting because, and I strongly recommend you go watch it because it's an entire interview. It's like 14 minutes. It didn't make the episode because the episode was only 42 minutes long. But if you have Twitter, you can go over to Investigation Discovery's Twitter page or whatever, and they have like a digital interview with Kerry where it's myself, Nancy Grace, and Mauro Campo. And we talked to Kerry about the similarities between BTK and Rex Heuermann, because I believe from what Kerry was saying is that BTK recently said Rex is a carbon copy of him. He's a clone, is his exact words. So she didn't get into too many details, but she did talk about the fact that she was currently working on something with investigators regarding her dad, and that she had paid some visits to him lately, and basically said like he's in really rough shape. She wasn't saying it in a bad way, but basically like he's rotting away in there, and she never like never tries to make him look like a victim or anything. She's just very pragmatic. Like she just tells you what it is. And although she didn't say what it was, she alluded to being involved in some investigations that were ongoing regarding her dad. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be that those were those investigations she was referring to without actually saying anything. Because listen, she knows that if you're not going to get anything from Dennis, she's your next best bet. And she knows that house. That's where she grew up.
Right.
And she's commented on this numerous times on her Twitter. So you can go follow her. It's at Kerry Rawson, I believe. But yeah, she's great. Again, to imagine what she's been through, and most people in this situation just go away and you never hear from them again. But she's taking the situation and turning it into a positive. She's written books, I believe, as well.
She's reclaiming it, I feel like, because I feel like sometimes there's a degree of shame that isn't, not that we're assigning that to them, but the children of these killers, the spouses of these killers, they will feel a degree of shame. Like, I should have noticed, I should have seen. How did this happen like right under my nose and I didn't know? And they shouldn't feel that way, but I think it's probably natural and a human thing to feel. But she's reclaiming it and she's trying to do her part which I assume also as well is kind of a thing that would be hard for the psyche, this person's bad. He hurt other people, but he's still your flesh and blood. He's still your father. So there's got to be this battle of the psyche of like, do I just shut up and let the police do their work, or do I help and try to make up for what he did in any way that I can? And I think that she's taking the right path. She's taking the path that's clearly right for her. Not everybody would take that path, and not everybody should. It's what you feel is right inside for you, how you feel you can continue on every day in the best way. So whatever these loved ones, these relatives of serial killers decide to do, however they decide to go out into the world, we need to support them and allow them to do that, because they are victims as well. They definitely are. And I don't think that they necessarily see themselves that way, but they should know that we do understand and see them that way.
100%. And I do apologize to Kerry. Not only I said, I think she's written a book. Yeah, she's written a book. She's a New York Times bestseller. Yeah. The book is called A Serial Killer's Daughter. So clearly it's a pretty good book. I haven't read it yet, but now I have to read it because I just didn't even know the name of it. So I apologize, Kerry. I'm going to read it now, I promise. And I'll have you sign it when I see you the next time. I believe she's going to be at CrimeCon. So
I met her at CrimeCon. What was it? Austin, I believe, when we were in the green room. We were getting mic'd up for two separate things. And we were talking because, getting mic'd up takes absolutely forever. And we were chatting, and she has his eyes, right? Like
she does have some resemblance to him.
Yeah. So upon first meeting her, I was struck by that. It was very eerie. But then she starts talking, and you realize that she's like the nicest, most self-aware, really like self-aware, intelligent person. She's clearly put a lot of thought, a lot of introspection into this. I think she's probably processed things the correct way. I think she's really opened herself up to it. She hasn't really suppressed a lot. She hasn't really buried a lot. I think she kind of let herself feel everything so that she could process through it, and she's better for it. So really, I hope to see her this year at CrimeCon. Yeah.
She'll be there. And as far as, the overall news that we're covering here, kudos to detectives, investigators. It looks like, as you mentioned, they found some things. Hopefully they're able to, connect the dots and tie it back to him and give some of these families some answers, even though it's been a long time. I'm glad to see they haven't put these in the back, on the back burner in a box somewhere to let him collect dust, because it's like, hey, he could be tied to these, but he's already in prison, so why are we going to waste our resources on that? I'm glad to see they're taking the initiative to try to close these cases out.
He's kind of like an egomaniac, so I wonder if they do put enough of the dots together and they bring it to him. They're like, okay, we've got this, this, and this.
Yeah,
like you're
he
here
confessed
forever.
To the others.
Yeah, you're here forever, dude. So you might as well, we know you're not going to lead us to it, but if we do the work and we put the dots together, can you at least admit to it?
I feel like that's
Because he's so egotistical. He might get a kick out of it. That might be his only like joy in prison now.
It and Carrie will correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like maybe that's what she went in there for.
Yeah.
To see if she could get him to acknowledge some of these things, confess to some stuff. It didn't sound too positive, but maybe once they do the rest of this research and now they start to tie some evidence to it, some actual tangible evidence, maybe they go back at him and he says, yeah, you know what? You're right. It was back there. It was me.
Damn, what must that be like talking to your, like sitting across from your father?
That's what I'm saying. I can't imagine it. Can't imagine it to be in that perspective.
Knowing that he took the lives of all these young girls just like you are, you know? And to have him look at her, right? Because she was just a kid when this was happening. Yeah. She wasn't a young woman.
Yeah, he was murdering these people and then coming home that day.
But now she is sitting there across from him resembling, you know, as far as age and things, like some of his victims. And that has to be, I think, hopefully, if there's any humanity in him at all, a little bit jarring for him as well to consider, you know, like all of these victims were the daughters of somebody, just like my daughter is sitting here across from me. Like, I don't know. Does he have love for her? Does he feel anything? Like, I don't know.
No. Nope. You don't feel anything. Well, we're thinking of the families and we're thinking of the investigators working this because it's hard work to do these cold cases because the geography of the area, the topography has changed. The witnesses aren't as abundant. It's a lot. It's hard to do these cold cases. Yeah, it's a lot of work, you know, digging up, you know.
You're basically like an archaeologist at this point.
No, it's very difficult. So we're wishing everyone the best of luck and hopefully we have some news shortly. It seems like we could. So best to Carrie as well if she's continuing to stay involved with this, and kudos to her to, you know, for continuing to help and try to give some of these families some resolution. Any final words from you, Stephanie Harlow?
No, I do not. I do not have any final words.
Okay, cool. Back to school, done September 4th. And as we just mentioned about CrimeCon, I've seen online that most of the CrimeCon passes are sold out, but there might be some day passes available now.
Yeah, they looked like they were selling day passes. I saw that just the other day on Instagram.
So if you want to get up on that. Make sure you use the code Crime Weekly and get, I believe you save 10%. So it's sold out. It's going to be a big event. I think there's 4,000 people.
Lots of people. I'm going to have a mental breakdown at least 50 times a day.
Great. That's great for me. I'm just going to stick you under the table and have you rip up stickers. No. Just feed them up. Just put them up on the top of the table. Just see your hand come up.
No, now you just told people my hiding spot.
Well, I mean, they could see it. Your feet were sticking out half the time. Okay. We appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for joining us. We will see you on Crime Weekly on audio on Friday, YouTube on Sunday. Everyone stay safe out there. We'll see you soon.
Bye.